Kupuram, advisor for KSR Data Vision. Now we talk about databases and its evolution. So when database started, it was a kind of flat, then a tree database, then network, then plain DBMS, then RDBMS, then object databases, then object relational database, now NoSQL. Like that it is going on and on. So it is a long way. So maybe there are enterprise level licensed software is there, that is database. Okay, then open source database also is there. So in open source database, two important databases are there, RDBMS. It is one is MySQL, the another is Postgres. Both are open source. It is free to use. Maybe whoever wants to learn, they can learn RDBMS in a maybe structured manner by learning MySQL. It is very simple SQL. Okay. Yeah. So what is a database? So database is a collection of data. So how we store? So we store in tables. Table. What is the structure of table? It is rows and columns. So what is the column? It is a kind of attribute of entity. So what is entity? So it is called a business entity. So when we say, maybe for example, employee, okay, maybe student, invoice, supplier, customer, all this called as business entities. Okay. So when we talk about business entities now, so the entities got some attributes. For example, if you take customer name, that is one attribute. Customer ID, one attribute. Customer phone number, customer email, customer address, all these things are attributes. So this is actually employee identity, employee entity. So employee entity got so many attributes. These attributes form as columns in a table. Okay, for example, if you say maybe customer, for example, we take DSR Data Vision or Google. So Google is a company name. So if we give maybe some ID, maybe G1, G2 like that, that is ID, customer ID. So maybe country, USA. So we take only 3 attributes. If you form a table for this entity, it is one column is one attribute. So the customer ID is one column. Customer name, that is another column. Customer country, another column. So 3 attributes form 3 columns. Okay, how we store? The value is, okay, it is, we name maybe G1, that is customer ID. Customer name Google. Okay, then customer country USA. These are all the values. When we store these values in a table, okay, in columns, that is called row. Okay, it is a kind of cells, matrices like that. So vertically it is columns, okay, horizontally it is rows. So tables are made up of rows and columns. So this is how we store in a table. So when we define more tables for every entity, it is collection of tables now that makes a database. Okay, this is plain database. What is a RDBMS? RDBMS means Relational Database Management System. So relational, what is the difference between normal database and relational database? In relational database, so we define relationship between entities. So when we raise one invoice for a customer, okay, the invoice is a transaction. In transaction, we are going to give a value of the customer ID. G1 is our Google's customer ID. Okay. Now invoice number, we say maybe IN1 invoice number. So for this invoice number IN1, to whom we are going to provide some service? Google. So G1 is the customer ID of Google. So we are going to relate this invoice, okay, raised to customer Google. So this is the relationship. Okay. So it is a kind of entity. Between entities, we are defining relationship. So relationship actually it will help us to identify a transaction that is conducted for or against one another entity. So this invoice one entity, customer is another entity. So we are relating these two entities, okay, by giving the customer ID in invoice table. So when we define the table for invoice, we give just invoice number, invoice date, maybe customer ID. So this customer ID, okay, is there in the table invoice also and customer also. So when we relate these two tables, the relationship column is customer ID. Okay. So now we'll stop here. We'll maybe take up all other things later on. Okay. Thanks. Take care.